while we approach every change as if it's unique and unpredictable, it's not. We take the same change journey over and over and over again. The catalyst change, sometimes the obstructions, if you will, in the roadway change, but the journey itself is the same. If it wasn't, there would be no such thing as a profession called change management. The second piece of what's important is, while we talk about organizational change management, organizations don't change. It's people. And so whether I'm coaching Lori as she's moving into launching a new business, or whether I'm working with a global transformation, it's the same journey, just a different scale.
Welcome to the People Powered Solutions podcast. In this show, you'll gain expert advice and tips on building a thriving workplace culture with happy employees. I'm your host, Lorianne Duguay, and I'm thrilled to be spending this time with you today. Hello, and welcome to another episode of People Powered Solutions. A few months ago, I was a guest on a podcast and met this incredible guest that we've got here today, had some great conversations, and decided that I think my listeners may appreciate some of the insight that he's able to provide as well. So welcome to the show, Brian Gorman.
It's great to be here and to pick up our conversation again, Lori.
Awesome. So Brian, how about you share with our audience how Brian got to doing what Brian does today?
It is a 5-decade-long story, so I'm gonna.
Oh, geez, we're here for an hour or two
now. I'm gonna try to make it really quick. My freshman year at Syracuse University, it was 1967-68, and I was a volunteer doing youth work on the Onondaga Reservation outside of Syracuse. I quickly recognized that the university's portrayal of its mascot, which was a Native American, was racist and xenophobic. It was the Caucasian fraternity brothers dressed up like Hollywood Indians, running around like they were drunk, basically. And so I spent the next 4 years really trying to get the university to change the mascot, change the portrayal of the mascot. The university is located in the heart of the Iroquois Confederacy, to bring Native American learning, if you will, into the university. I failed, but the spark about making change happen was ignited in me, and that's what's run through my entire career.
Amazing.
It's brought me to the point now where I am an executive coach, a transformation coach, and I am vice president for program development for Quantivos, which is a professional development firm with coaching at its core.
Amazing, amazing. So you mentioned that the spark of change was ignited back in the day. Let's talk about change, because one of the only constants in business, in organizations, is change, ironically. It's always going to come up. And so how can, for the benefit of our listeners, our leaders and organizations support and help their team members better navigate change? Perhaps we talk about how we can be more strategic in rolling out change, and what are some best practices when it comes to change management. Are you good with us going kind of in that realm for beginning of this conversation?
I'm happy to. One of the things I've learned over the years is that while, and I'm paraphrasing, if not quoting directly, Joseph Campbell now, while we approach every change as if it's unique and unpredictable, it's not. We take the same change journey over and over and over again. The catalyst change, sometimes the obstructions, if you will, in the roadway change, but the journey itself is the same. If it wasn't, there would be no such thing as a profession called change management. The second piece of what's important is, while we talk about organizational change management, organizations don't change. It's people. And so whether I'm coaching Lori as she's moving into launching a new business, or whether I'm working with a global transformation, it's the same journey, just a different scale.
Okay, let's talk about that journey then. Let's give people insight into what are some of those, if it's the same journey every single time, let's talk about some of the key touch points throughout that journey where they may want to spend time, focus, and energy in ensuring that they are setting their teams up for success in navigating those key touch points.
So it begins with the end. It begins with the destination.
I like
if you don't know where you're going, you'll never know whether you're on the right path or whether you're going to get there. What's important about beginning with the end in mind is neuroscience, and very specifically, the role of story. As human beings, we've had story longer than we had language. We would draw a story in the dirt, would paint it on walls, on hide of caves, on hides. Story was the way we communicated. Our brains are story processors. They're not logic processors. And what's interesting about our brain and story, and there's lots of neuroscience research to validate this now, is our brain doesn't know the difference between the present, the reality, and a future story. So the story you want is not about in 5 years we're going to achieve X, Y, and Z. That's a head story. That is likely not to even get the CEO up and excited to go to work on some of the most difficult days. The story is a story from the future, not a story about the future. It's a head, heart, gut story. 5 years ago, we committed to X, Y, and Z. We had to overcome this. We had to do that. We had to achieve something else. And we're here. We did it. That story actually begins to build new neural networks, new muscle memory. And the more we spend our time sort of intentionally living into the story, the more real it becomes. And what happens is our unconscious, which filters out most of what makes it into our awareness, our unconscious knows what it's like to achieve that outcome that we're talking about, because we've talked about it as if we actually have achieved it. And so when we run into those obstacles that are inevitable, our unconscious says there's got to be a way through, under, around, over this obstacle, because I know what it's like on the other side, and begins to allow through the unconscious filters those kinds of thoughts, those kinds of awarenesses that allow us to find the solutions to move forward. So story is key.
I love it. I love that head, heart, and gut story. I love how you start with the past almost. I know you say start with the end in mind, but still going and reaching into the past, that we've done this before, we've navigated this journey before, and you guys, we were able to do it, and we've overcome so many challenges along the way, which only made us stronger as a team. Then to get them to start to think about that future story you talked about, that head, heart, and gut future story, and the neural pathways will have already been bridged from what you're saying and created in that past story when you've reminded them of us being able to do this successfully in the past, and moving forward, here's what we want to be doing, and then getting them enlisted, or I guess getting their buy-in for that future story. What might a future story sound like?
Well, I'll give you one at a personal level. It was a client of mine who several years ago, back during the housing market crash, she and her husband were both laid off. It was second marriages. They owned 2 homes. They were in their mid-50s. They decided that they wanted to create a 5-year plan to retire and move to Costa Rica. So a traditional story about that would be, in 5 years, over the next 5 years, we have to sell 2 houses in a tough housing market. We have to learn Spanish. We have to dispose of most of our property because we can't afford to move it all to Costa Rica. We have to figure out how to maintain relationships with our children and our grandchildren. Let's move to Florida, right? their story began, we did it. And it only took us 3 years. We woke up this morning in our new home in Costa Rica. The ocean breeze is blowing through the bedroom windows. We can hear the chatter of Spanish in the street. We had to sell 2 homes in the midst of a housing market crash. We had to learn Spanish. We had to dispose of most of our property. We had to figure out how to stay in touch with our kids. We did it.
Ah, okay. I get you now. You tell the story as if it's already a done deal.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Like it.
And for all of those, and there are many of us who say, I'm not a good storyteller. Yes, you are. All of us are telling ourselves stories 24 hours a day.
Absolutely.
And we believe them. They become our truths. They guide how we live our lives. Make this story about whether it's a personal change or an organizational change. Create that story and then live into it.
Love it. Would you recommend that leaders enlist their team members in the creation of that story as an exercise, or would they prescribe it? They define it themselves and then kind of share it with the team?
You need to bring in the perspectives. Who knows better the relationship you have and you need with your customers than your frontline employees, as an example. Yeah. And so you really do need to draw on people throughout the organization to create this story and to own it. And you need room for the story to be localized, because at its heart, the story is going to be the same, but it's going to have differences for the purchasing department than for the sales team, than for the manufacturing team, and so forth.
And anytime you're navigating change, I use change management, Kotter's traditional 8-step to change type change management strategies. And one of the key steps is to involve the team in the development of that change strategy, right? So by getting them to help and enlisting them, not only does it provide a more realistic picture of what that future state might look like with the nuances between departments, as you just mentioned, but it also starts to create that coalition of change and starts to get people invested into the change management strategy, right?
You're doing it with me, not to me.
Absolutely. You're doing it with me, not to me. I love that. Absolutely. Okay, so start with the end in mind, define your good story. Let's continue our change journey.
The next step is prepare, not plan, because we only plan for what we're consciously aware of. And so there are so many things that, again, play in the unconscious that if we don't pay attention to, can trip us up. We don't have time to talk about all of them. The one I will bring up in this conversation is what I call anchors. And anchors are those things that give us a sense of security, a sense of control, a sense of predictability. They're great when times are stable.
Yeah.
But as we're recording this, there's an incredible hurricane just moving ashore in Florida. And many ships are going to be lost. Many boats are going to be lost because the anchor that kept them safe, or the ties to the dock or whatever that kept them safe, are going to be too tight for the storm surge. And they're going to sink. Or they're not going to, the lines are not going to be strong enough and they're going to break away. So what are the personal and the organizational anchors? And as you think about that, what are the sea anchors? Sea anchors are those things that larger ships use when they're out on the open water. They don't go down to the bottom of the ocean. They actually float below the surface, and they keep the ship facing into the turbulence so that it can continue its journey without capsizing. So what are the organizational sea anchors? Those things that can keep it facing into the turbulence and moving forward. What are the other anchors? What changes and adjustments do we need to make? Do we need to find ways to live more strongly into our values, for example? as an organizational anchor? Do we need to find a way to reconnect from frontline to C-suite to our purpose as a AC anchor as we're moving into this change? What anchors do we have to let go of? Virtually everybody who worked in an office had to let go of that commute, whether they liked it or not. The water cooler talk, whether they were a part of it or felt left out. Those were all anchors when COVID hit. And like any big change, some anchors we need to let go of. We may need new anchors. We may need to make adjustments in our relationship to them. So as you're going through this prepare phase, now you can begin to plan. So how are we going to tighten our alignment to our values? How are we going to recreate that line of sight from frontline to C-suite to our purpose? When are we going to do it? What do we need to do it? So this preparation and planning, not just around anchors, but around a number of different things, becomes a very iterative process.
What are other examples? You spoke of purpose and impact and connecting to the latter, as well as values. What are some other common organizational organizational anchors that people may want to keep at the front of their mind in terms as they're examining which we need to let go of? And so I guess my question is two-tiered. One, which are some of the ones that they need to lean into versus which are some that commonly need to be let go of?
My best answer is it depends.
They
are so both personal to the individual and personal to the organization. And just a real quick example, I was doing anchors workshops for anyone who wanted to show up soon after COVID hit. And the basic structure of the workshop, and it was virtual, was that I would introduce the concept. People would go out into breakout rooms to explore what their anchors were and how they were being disrupted by COVID. Come back, share that information, then we'd talk about how to make adjustments to them. They go back into breakouts and so forth. And after that first breakout, this one gentleman came virtually running back into the main room. And before I could say anything, he said, "Now I get it. Now I get it." I said, "What do you get?" He said, "I'm a Wall Street lawyer. For 20 years, every morning I've gotten up, I've put my suit on, I've taken the subway into the office." He said, "The first 2 weeks of COVID, I was home, I had all of my files, I had my laptop, I had access to the computer in the office. I go into my home office. At the end of the day, I achieved nothing. And then one day I put my suit on, went into my home office, and I was back in control."
Oh yeah, love it.
Anchors are personal. He had another one. He said, "So now when I leave my home office at the end of the day, I text my wife to tell her I'm coming home."
I love it. Wow. Yeah. It's funny because I think a lot of people felt that when we moved home during the pandemic, and suddenly it became acceptable to take a call with pajama pants on or to wear frumpier, more casual clothing in a setting where had we been in an actual office setting, we would have never thought to do that, right? That would have never been acceptable. And I think we needed to swing the pendulum that far back just because we were in sheer survival mode. But then as we've moved back into the workplace, and some have adopted either a permanent telework type approach to the work environment, others have integrated a more hybrid setting. I think it's important for us to nuance and to make sure we're clear in terms of expectations. And even from a personal standpoint, to that perfect example you just shared, putting that jewelry on, putting my blazer on, putting my work clothes on, it defines. I do work from home, so it defines I'm getting my day on. This is me starting my professional, job day. That's how I start it,
Absolutely.
right? And having
Absolutely.
these routines to set those boundaries is really important in terms of understanding and navigating this new reality, this new world of work.
And if you or I are currently wearing our pajama bottoms, we would have to change that anchor if we were going into a meeting in person with a client.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Perfect example. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so we've got start with the end in mind, define that story, define that vision. Then we've got prepare, not plan, because before you plan, you need to prepare and let go of certain anchors and lean into others that your sea anchors as you define them, which I really like that analogy because it helps wrap my mind around, the sea anchor versus the dock. The dock is what might break you while because there's too many unknowns that are likely to happen, but leaning into that sea anchor and facing it head on is how you're going to be able to come out that much more resilient. So we've got prepare. Is there anything else relevant to the prepare phase that we want to share with listeners?
There's a lot. What are the resources we're going to need? So how do we begin to plan on obtaining those resources? Who's going to make the journey? Who's not? And how are we going to address that? So as you are surfacing those things that you need to plan for, you begin the planning and you can actually begin to move forward. But planning is not, and I'm older than you, Lori, so you might not have experienced this, but I remember developing multi-thousand line change management plans on, in project management software showing all of the interdependencies and task relationships, and that doesn't work. It's dead on arrival. Planning is a much more iterative process. What we really need to pay attention to in planning are what are the key milestones, and look at milestones through two lenses. Installation. What are the things we need to have in place and when? If we're looking to change to a more collaborative team culture, when do we need to change our compensation plan to reflect that? So forth and so on. So what are the new technologies we need to put in place? What are the new training around those technologies or the processes or whatever it is? But so all of those things that we have to put in place, what are the milestones? Not what is every step from here to there, but what are the milestones? What are the initial steps we need to take? All you really need to know is what is the next step I need to take me in the right direction.
Absolutely. And the milestones, sorry, don't mean to cut in. The milestones, I think it's important to have a variety of milestones. You can have the heavier, bigger, kind of longer term milestones, but it's important to have a lot of smaller ones spread it across the entire period that the change is going to impact, because people need to get on board and be able to celebrate some of those quick wins early on to maintain momentum, right?
Absolutely. The other set of milestones we need are what are often referred to as realization milestones. So what are the milestones around changes in behavior? And when do they have to be in place to, again, get us to that end result that we've identified in that story from the future? Because you can put all of the new technology in place, you can put all the new policies in place, you can put all the new procedures in place, and if you don't work to intentionally change behavior, you're not going to get there.
Yeah, you need to change habit, you need to change behavior. Absolutely. When I'm coaching just one-on-one clients, often there's change required, right? So you said earlier, what's that next step? Determining what that next step is. With clients, I often say something along the lines of, okay, I know this seems super overwhelming. We've kind of built a plan to get you to where you want to go. We've included some milestones. I want to know today, what's the biggest small step you can take to get you that much closer? And that's going to be a personal, right? That's it depends kind of question answer to that. It's going to change, that the size of that step will change, maybe depending on, the mental health and where they're sitting right now, how stable they are in their lives. But it's important to, at the very least, take one minute change if possible. Absolutely. Okay. We're planning for resources. We're planning, including milestones, the two different kinds of milestones. What other touch point will we be hitting along our change journey?
As you're now moving through the journey, the most important thing, actually, I think two critically important things. See those shiny objects and keep on moving right past them.
Okay.
And keep your eye on the horizon. Given what we have experienced with COVID, given the uncertainty of what that means for the future of work, given whatever artificial intelligence may mean for the future of work, you may be on absolutely the right path today. But when you get to that destination 2 years from now, you may be in the very worst place you could be, given the shifts in the external environment. So walk past those shiny objects and be aware that as right as your path may be, you may need to make it significantly different before you get to the destination you're heading for.
You may need to continuously adapt and pivot based on changing circumstances.
Yep.
I like it. Shiny objects. Tell us more about that. What are some common shiny objects that, as we're navigating change, we might be inclined to move towards?
Again, that's sort of an it depends answer, but for some leaders coming out of COVID, the shiny object is get your butts back in seats in the office.
Let's go back to the old norm.
Yeah. Artificial intelligence, I think, is becoming a shiny object. Any number of companies in a number of different industries are suddenly AI superstars, and some of them are shooting stars, quite frankly, that are already sinking because they've jumped onto a bandwagon that really they don't know how to work with yet.
Or would it also be from a shiny object? Maybe it's not a shiny object, but it's just a distraction where they suddenly will move away from their focus of that end goal and say, "Oh, this is going to sink us. Like AI is going to sink us. This is the end of what we do as a business."
It could be, for many years, the shiny object was referred to down in the ranks of the organization as the management theory of the month.
True. There are quite a few management theories out there. So, okay. So move past shiny objects, keep on walking. I think we could have a whole other conversation on AI. But for the purpose of our listeners and staying on track with our journey here, you said there were two critical things: move past shiny objects
and keep your eye on the horizon.
Yeah, so stay focused. So what are some of the ways or best practices that you've seen with clients in terms of maintaining that momentum and helping your team members stay focused on the horizon?
You mentioned one of them early on in the conversation, which is celebrate. Don't wait 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, wherever that end state sits. Find those reasons to celebrate along the way. You might want to celebrate the fact that you made a wrong turn on the path.
Yeah.
And you learned it in time to reconnect with the path.
Nice.
So celebration, really continuing to revisit that story to make it more real, to tune it in, if you will.
Yeah.
I started with one client, started her journey, her story. All she knew was how she wanted to feel in the work that she was doing, the kinds of people she wanted to work with, and the fact that she wanted to be known for her signature red blazer. That was her story.
I like that client already.
She didn't even know what her work was going to be. So having that aha moment, that allows us to build more of the story, to focus it in more. My client who moved to Costa Rica, again, was a 5-year goal. They did it in 3 years. They discovered they really didn't want to be on the coast. They wanted to be up in the mountains, which is where they are now.
There you go.
So continue to tune that story.
Yeah, it could be, and be open to revisiting the story.
Absolutely.
Be open to checking in with your team members to make sure that it's still relevant, that that's the horizon is still the horizon that you want to work towards.
Yeah,
Or have things transpired or situations and challenges led to so many pivots that we need to revisit the horizon and redefine it. And so I've seen with clients that it's never sequential in steps, that it's a bit all over the map, and there's no logic to say that once you've defined that story, then you can't revisit it. It's actually the opposite in terms of helping your team understand how to navigate change, helping them understand that it's okay to adapt, pivot, and change along the way, as long as you know what that end game is, right?
absolutely.
Okay, so I love that you've shared that journey. Are there any other really crucial steps? Now we've navigated the change, we've kept our eyes on the horizon. What's that? Is there another step at the end?
Well, and you're making the journey. The last important thing that we often lose sight of is when we get to that destination, life is different.
Mm,
The interactions, the people we're interacting with, the work we're doing, how we're doing, life is different. So you need, again, along that journey, those milestones, you need to be preparing to live life differently.
mm. Yes, absolutely. And so I think it might have value to redefine the new norm and to help people embrace and step into it, right? To say,
Yeah,
this is our new norm. It is great, and celebrate what are the pros and cons of the new norm so that you're continuously evolving. I think that's your approach is brilliant and has provided insight for our listeners in terms of being more strategic with how they roll out change and how they implement change. As I mentioned at the very onset of the conversation, one of the only constants in business is change. If you're okay with it, I'd like for us to talk about one of the trending changes that is occurring in the workforce right now.
absolutely. I just want to add one last thing.
Absolutely.
As you're moving through this journey, there's grief. You have to let go of what was in order to move into what is.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing so, all too often people bash the past. The past is what got you to where you are today.
Mm-hmm.
You can grieve it, you can celebrate it. Don't condemn it.
Don't condemn it. I like that. Value the past for what it has provided
Yeah,
and how it has facilitated and enabled the growth that you've now achieved.
absolutely.
Amazing. Thank you for that kind of closing, but very important piece that I think might be helpful for listeners who are able to think about a change in the past and recognize where they might have condemned that earlier state instead of celebrated it and valued it for the growth that it allowed. So the 4-day work week. How do you feel about the 4-day work week, Brian?
I'm all for it. That's the soundbite answer. Actually, I am personally one of the co-owners of the 4-day work week trademark here in the United States.
Really?
Tony Carnesi, my colleague in that venture, and I actually obtained approval for the trademark about 2 weeks after COVID hit. But what we were talking about then, what we continue to talk about today, is not taking 40 hours and squeezing them into 4 days, nor is it every business, every company, every organization should be working Monday through Thursday or Tuesday through Friday or Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. Why we became engaged in the 4-day work week early on was that we saw there are many opportunities to improve the productivity of organizations, to maintain or increase the bottom line, if you will, while demanding less hours of the worker to make that happen. And
Okay.
so what we're really talking about is a flexible work week that is built around serving the clients or customers of the organization, that is built around the people inside the organization, and that is built around the needs and purpose of the organization itself.
Awesome. I agree. One of the things we touch on in my book, as well as when I'm working with clients, is the importance of helping and providing some level of control to team members over how they structure their workday, how they structure their work week. What are some of the best practices or some of the success stories that you've seen as companies start to implement this more flexible working arrangement?
North America is slow on the uptake on this one. There are companies throughout Asia, Microsoft in Japan, a whole big experiment in Great Britain and Europe. You don't just do it. You don't say, as of September 1st or as of January 1st, we're going to a 4-day work week. It takes literally at a minimum a couple of months of preparation if you're an organization of any size. It takes actively engaging, again, with the people in the organization from the front lines on up. Where are we wasting time? Ask the questions, shut up and listen. Don't defend the practices of the past because they worked in the past. If it's not working now, if it's not working as well as it could now, then how do we improve it? When do we improve it? So actively engage people. What is the flexibility, again, that fits your organization, your people, and your clients? Many project-based businesses like advertising agencies and so forth have found that they can do a 4-day work week by literally working Monday to Thursday or Tuesday or Friday or whatever that might be, as long as they prepare their clients for that. There are other businesses that they need to be 5 days, 6 days, 7 days a week. But for many of them, some people are working 4 days, working 8 hours a day.
Right? You can schedule it that, okay, we're a 5-day business, but half our workforce will do Monday to Thursday and half will do Tuesday to Friday, right? That's absolutely, it is doable.
Or whatever that overlap is, that is your heavy business day. Or it might be, Lori, you're working 4 days a week. I want to get my kids off to school, so I'm coming in later, but I'm working 5 days a week. Or I want to attend after school activities with my kids, so I'm leaving earlier, but I'm working 5 days a week.
When I worked for government, we had compressed work weeks. So we would put in more hours, just a bit more hours every day, a few minutes, I should say, so that every 2 weeks we would have a 4-day work week. There's different ways to structure these things, right?
There are. And again, in the ideal, we're not talking about compressed hours.
Yeah.
We're talking about more effective work.
Sure. More effective, more productive work. So let's devil's advocate, and I know we're almost at time here, but really quickly, I have a lot of clients who are in the manufacturing industry, where they need people on 24/7. How might they approach a 4-day work week or a flexible working arrangement that would operationally be feasible?
That becomes a lot more difficult. Same in the healthcare industry with hospitals,
I also have a lot of clients that help.
service industries, fire, police, and so forth. It becomes a lot more difficult. And many of them have found ways of making it work.
And it's where flexibility becomes key, right? Okay, maybe a 4-day work week is it's not realistic, but what flexibility can I operationally afford you on how you structure your approach to work? Instead of getting your work done.
Yeah. Must I work the second shift every week? Or do I have the flexibility to switch with Lori, who works the third shift, so that I can go out with my partner for dinner some night?
Okay. That's really great advice. I would love, I think, to have a second episode with you down the line, especially if you are co-owner of that trademark. I want us to expand on this whole concept, but in the spirit of trying to keep these episodes under the 40-minute mark, and I'm pretty sure we're right about at that mark now, I will wrap that up here and start by thanking you, Brian, for all this amazing insight in terms of the change journey. I love how you've called it a change journey, and that you were able to help people understand that change, the journey itself, is repeated despite the nature of that change, that you're following that same journey, and that you were able to provide some very key touch points and steps that journey entails, and advice along all those steps. Just really quickly, we talked about beginning with the end in mind, the power of story, and it be not a head story, but a head, heart, and gut story, and defining it, preparing and identifying the anchors that you need to keep and stay focused on, letting go of those that you don't, planning for milestones, including milestones, as well as resources as you're navigating, being open to pivoting and to adapting as you're navigating the actual change, the implementation, walking right past the shiny objects and focusing on the horizon, and finally celebrating at the end and not condemning the past for what it was, celebrating and recognizing that we need to now redefine that new norm and help people navigate and accept the new norm, but also help them understand that it's okay to grieve the past, and it's normal to grieve the past. And by celebrating and valuing it for what it now afforded you as an organization, and this new norm that you've created because of that past, they're likely going to embrace and go past that grieving process much quicker than they would if we were just stuck in our heads and condemning it. Is that a not bad summary?
That's great. Thank you.
And then we quickly touched on, but listeners, I do promise we are going to revisit that 4-day work week. The co-owner of the trademark in the US, hello, we need to definitely dive a bit deeper into that topic. In closing, Brian, if there was one nugget of wisdom that you wanted to leave our listeners with today, what might that be?
Slow down and breathe. Reflect on your own experience and the experience of others around you, because that's where the lessons lie.
Amazing. Thank you. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in to another episode of People Powered Solutions. In closing, as I always do, I want you to think about what you've just heard and all of the amazing insight that was provided throughout the episode. What is one change you can start to make or implement based on what you've just heard? Then get out there and make that happen.
Well, folks, thanks for joining us for yet another enriching conversation. To hear more about today's guest, make sure to check out the links in the description of this episode. Want to continue the conversation? Then head on over to our social media platforms, all of which are also linked in the description, to keep it going. Finally, don't forget to subscribe to make sure you don't miss another valuable episode.